it's my pleasure to introduce Dante Ritchie of SAP to introduce the panelists, and then I've got some riveting questions for them, I promise you. Okay. Dante? Here he comes. Okay.
Thanks. SAP is proud to be a sponsor, a Title I sponsor of this event for shared services and working with you, our colleagues, to make sure we're getting the most out of our taxpayer money, being stewardship of our taxpayer dollars. We're thankful to be working with the USDA in a shared service financial management environment. And as David said earlier this morning in his keynote, it is time to unleash the change. So I really like that quote, wrote it down, and I will keep that quote with me. Now, I was to introduce Scott, actually, as the moderator. I did not have the names of the panelists, but I do have them here in front of me, so let me go ahead and just introduce the four panelists. Cheryl Cook, Chief Information Officer of the USDA. Greg Parham, Assistant Secretary for Administration and Chief Acquisition Officer, Department of Agriculture. David Vargas, Director, Human Resources, Information Technology Transformation of the Office of Personnel Management. Kathleen Turco, Chief Financial Officer of Veterans Health Administration. Show you up here. And without further ado, I'll let Scott take care of the business here of the panel. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure. Let's see, test. Okay, it does work, good. So we have a distinguished panel of CXOs, one from each stripe here. We have a Chief Information Officer, a Chief Financial Officer, a Chief Acquisition Officer, and a Chief Human Capital Officer. This I think, is a great opportunity to ask these folks some questions which I am surprising them with. I didn't practice this on purpose because I'm very interested in what their let's say spontaneous response to this will be. And I would say to the panelists that it's okay if you give your personal opinion. In fact, I suspect that you may want to, as opposed to your agency's view on this, but if you want to mix that, please make it clear which is which. Because the first question, if each of you would spend just 2 or 3 minutes, 5 max, because then I'll give you the sign, on the following question, and we'll start with Dave and then just go down the row. Should back office shared services, meaning those commodity IT, financial, HR, time and attendance, travel, training, those types of services, should they be mandatory or can they be voluntary and still be effective for each agency? So it's the mandatory, voluntary question.
So good morning, everyone. I bring a very biased opinion. I'm a bean counter. And from the human capital perspective, we know that shared service providers and mandatory provider services such as payroll, mostly, and to a great extent human capital components work very well. So we've proven now over the past 10 years through eGov. So I believe, in my opinion, that we need to move all agencies, and depending on the agency, it's going to take some time. But what we've done on the human capital side is we've actually gone to the chief human capital officers throughout federal government, and we've asked them. And it's really interesting to get the perspective and the direction and the vision from the chief the top guys at every federal agency as it relates to human capital. And what they're telling us that they want is they want a common user experience for the federal employment life cycle. So they're not talking about just payroll, they're not talking about just your 50/52s and things of that nature. They want an entire life cycle look at human capital that is based on the role of the individual. So employees have one way to look, one way to look at data. They're interested in their retirement, they're interested in, their pay and things of that nature. Management, executive management within each federal agency, and they want interoperability among all of these different applications. So they look at the entire life cycle.
So that's what they want. But how do you feel? Should it be mandatory?
Well, I think the way that the eGov initiative started with payroll being mandatory and then the HR component being at the end of the existing life cycle, because a lot of agencies already made pretty huge investments in things such as learning management or performance management. So, so to that extent, we'll say, let that, come to an end, let the entire life cycle end. Then when you start making that decision, you better have, if you're going to go your own, you better have a really good business case as to why it makes sense for an agency to go on their own and make these investments. From my perspective, if I was king for a day, I would say mandatory.
Kathleen?
So I'll start with yes, mandatory. As a lifelong budgeteer, we really, what's on? Can you hear me now?
Dave certainly works, so.
I didn't touch it. It says it's on. It's working right there. So I'll just answer as a lifelong budgeteer, yes, it should be mandatory. We just moved to a time and place where the resources should be focused on the mission of the departments and agencies and not on the back office operations. So I was reflecting on the panel before this, having worked for Dave Mader at IRS. We were undergoing the reorganization there, and we moved stuff to a shared services operation. It works. And then several years at GSA running a financial management shared service. It works. And at VA, what we're about to undertake, it will work. So I would say that's my personal opinion that it should be mandatory. Put it that way.
Okay, Greg?
Well, I'm going to say yes and no. Okay. The reason I'm saying yes and no is because in some instances,
So we're sharing.
This is shared night service.
and I'm going to have to say yes and no. And the reason I say that is because I think even when we think about the administrative and the management type things, even in the back office, things are always not monolithic, okay? Particularly in a department that is more a conglomerate than it is a single mission kind of department, such as the Department of Agriculture. So there are many things that, yes, I do believe should be mandatory, but there are some that maybe you need 2 or 3 flavors, but not as many as 15 or 16, okay? As an assistant secretary, when I first took the position, even though I was a chief acquisition officer, the CIO, the CHICO, and the CFO all reported to that assistant secretary. So often it feels like I was the chalk or the chief herder of cats. And so in doing that, one of the things that you have to consider is that, cats are terrible in a herd, but they can often be very, very functional independently. But sometimes there are things that you simply must do in a mandatory fashion, and we do some of that. But so much more of what we do is done independently, and we are struggling right now to see how best to share services amongst many of the various bureaus or agencies within the department. So it continues to be a challenge, and I know it's good to say that things need to be mandatory, but there's a huge path to get to that and many obstacles in the way.
Chair?
Okay, well, first of all, there we go, it works.
But just like the CIO is always independent.
And my technology works better. But I guess the way it's Federation is, as Greg said, 17 agencies, 10 staff offices, and mandatory means different things to different people on different schedules. We've tried to do some things that were mandatory, only to find out people had existing contracts, and, you know, I'll get to you in a year or two when we get off this existing contract and buy in. So we're finding ever so slowly, I think, that mandatory with flexibility is the way to go, and agree that it depends somewhat on what you're doing. Before I leave USDA, if it kills me, I'm going to consolidate the number of networks. We have a shared WAN backbone for our network, and then 15 VPNs that intersect it. And I don't know if we'll get to one, but we can get to fewer than 15. And that's one of those very basic, got-to-be mandatory kinds of things. I'm blessed with a very active component agency CIO council. Governance is a huge deal. Going back to the previous panel's point, it makes all the difference in the world when people impose something on themselves. We just yesterday were able to award our first consolidated Tier 1 help desk contract with Ability One. So it took us almost 2 years to get there, but all of the component agency CIOs took part in that process. All of them have a say in which way we were going. And whether they're going day one into the new contract or slowly rolling off wherever they're at, they're all literally bought in to that being our shared provider for Tier 1 help desk services. And the thing that's really significant about that one is that we're doing it through the Forest Service as a lead agency. So we're proving that you can, in fact, streamline and consolidate without the department, per se, necessarily owning everything. Very important to have that sense of self-governance and self-determination, I guess, because those agency-level, component agency-level CIOs still bear all of the responsibility to their agency heads that I bear to the secretary, and they want to be good stewards of their agency's resources. They all get their own appropriation in one way or another. And frankly, that affects how fast we adopt things, too, because we are a department of haves and have-nots. And we have a few agencies that do get their own IT appropriation, but most of them are carving IT out of a percentage of program dollars, or in some cases, out of salary and expense dollars. So they're choosing between boots on the ground and tools in the hands of the boots on the ground. And those get to be some really difficult decisions in these days. So it's a blend.
So thank you for your own opinions on that. I'm going to count it as 3.5 votes for mandatory. So to follow up a little bit then, if shared services for, back office functions, support functions, if you will, were to be made mandatory, what's the timeline that you would estimate would be needed to implement that across the board? And is a working capital fund a essential element? It just has to be there for that to be successful. So timeline on WCF. Dave?
I would say it depends. There's some things, I would argue, like time and attendance, for instance. That's something that you can probably do, with short period of time, but short in federal government, talking maybe between 3 to 5 years. Other things are a lot more complicated, like performance management systems. So it would depend. Right now, the HROB is looking to expand our core services from payroll and HR to what we call non-core functions, such as learning management and other areas. It all depends. Every agency is at a different part of the life cycle. So, it took us 10 years to consolidate, the 52s on payroll. I think it's going to take, at least in the human capital, at least another 10 years to get us to a good place. It also all depends on the leadership component in terms of data exchange and data management. Establishing standards, lean standards, or something akin to that, where we can make those systems inoperable. So in the meantime, you may not need to make those huge investments if you can actually get access to the data until those systems sunset.
Is a WCF essential to making it happen?
I don't believe that working capital fund is a good vehicle, and it's one of the things that we're looking at in terms of HRIT sustainability. If we want shared service providers to succeed, we got to make sure that they have the tools for them to be able to number one, update their systems. They need to have the ability to innovate. So I do not believe our working capital fund is a good enough vehicle right now. To me, something like Treasury is very successful with a franchise fund. Or SSPs, in my personal opinion, should have those kind of vehicles for them to be able to do so. And in our world, our agencies and our shared service providers, they do a lot of work with their clients in terms of governance. I think that's critical when it comes to where's the money going to come from to invest in new technology. It's not going to come from appropriations, folks, in terms of direct appropriations to a shared service provider agency. It's going to come in terms of appropriation to the clients that you serve. They got to see the value in what shared service providers are doing. And so that they'll be willing to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to throw in an extra 4%, or, I'll pay an extra 4% fee so that I know that we can maintain and sustain those existing systems and we have the ability to innovate.
So I'm hearing 10 years WCF is not essential. Kathleen?
So this is a tough one to answer. Is this one working either? No? All right, I'm going to try this one now. The challenge with the timeline is what are we applying the timeline to? What I've experienced is that what we've not been good at in the federal government is the pre-planning and the planning and the more planning that we should be doing, and the program and project management. And all of that needs to be done up front on the business side in terms of setting out the requirements that we have, whether it's financial systems or HR systems or the IT systems. And I think unfortunately that's where we shortchange this effort. And so then what happens is we fail to either transition to a new system or to the shared service, and we blame it on the software. And it's really never the software, it's generally the people. And so, and our lack of planning, and I think that is where, if we could get any assistance out of, the OMB or the Hill, is for the folks at OMB to understand that requirement for the pre-planning and the planning. It's just essential to getting, moving to a shared service or upgrading a system, et cetera. And not enough of that is going on. I think also on the business side, so not on the IT side, I'm saying on the business side, we are not providing enough in terms of requirements that we have and the standardization of those requirements. And what I faced is, well, I'd like the receivables to, big left. Well, no, really, a receivable should do a certain thing, that's it. And so not standardizing on that, and the CFO community not sort of mandating from that standpoint, we're going to do this one way and it's the right way, invites a whole lot of spin that doesn't need to take place. And I've just seen it at a lot of different agencies. And so we need to really stress in terms of the standards and what we're trying to achieve, and I think OMB should help us to drive that. The planning needs to take place, and then what about the change management? That's huge, and looking at the Veterans Health Administration, it's just ginormous in terms of us looking at, if we're going to move to a new financial system, what does that really mean, and the change that's going to take place across 151 hospitals and 800 plus clinics and multiple CBOX clinics, veterans, mobile units. I mean, it's just huge, the approach that we have to take, very different than at other agencies that I worked at. So, timeline, I think we need to lengthen the upfront timeline for the planning and the business requirements.
So Kathleen, can I pin you down a little more? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years?
Oh, I think the planning is at least a 2 to 3 year effort.
And then implementation? And then implementation, so 2 plus?
I think it's going to depend on the size. It
Yeah.
could be 2 to 4 years,
Okay.
depending on the rollout and also in terms of what's been.
And WCF essential or?
Oh, that's interesting, yeah. So I worked all of those, working capital fund, franchise fund. I think for a shared service organization, I think they need to have funding flexibility, they need to have a reserve, they need to have that capability. You're not going to have that in straight up appropriation. You don't necessarily get that in the working capital fund unless it's been written into the appropriation language. GSA had one, I'm pretty sure some other agencies have, and then franchise funds. I think the franchise We definitely need that. I would just say if you're asking a shared service to operate like a business, it really should have a revolving fund.
Okay.
And that's not what OMB's fond of, but it's really necessary for them to manage.
Do I get to say ouch at some point, or?
I was there 10 years, so I can talk about it.
Yes, you can, yeah. Greg, time frame on O&E, WCF?
On the timeline, I look at the examples of the recent past, and for example, we look at the enterprise data centers and how the metrics came out, 10 years ago? Okay, so we can start with that number, as my colleague mentioned. But I think even today, we declare success even though we haven't consolidated all of it. We've gone a very long way to provide them, but I think part of it has to focus on the service itself, okay, and the level of that service. The idea that we're doing shared services for shared services' sake, I think is a mistake. But the idea that we do it and that there is a service level agreement to which all agree does present with opportunity. USDA does not have a franchise fund, but we do have working capital funds. So you use the tool that you have to the best of your ability. Oftentimes, it's not the tool that you need.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl?
Okay, so you had to bring up data center consolidation. Greg is my boss. There's only so far I can go with this, but it didn't help either that OMB changed the definition of data center to now include all of the USDA field offices, which is actually our most extreme example, I think, of how long does it take, because Congress in 1994 passed the Department of Agriculture Reorganization Act that required the agencies that had field locations to co-locate. And it took the better part of 10 years to get there from where we started. But then by 2004, the Bush administration took away the authority of those agencies to do their own networking and end-user support and consolidated all of that under my shop. So we now have had 10 years of experience in fighting and scratching and clawing and eventually maturing a process by which those three, Farm Service Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Rural Development, share OCIO, end-user support, and network services in the field. This year, the process went as well as it has ever gone. My understanding is from those early years that it was like those cartoons where you just see this cloud of dust, a fist and a foot, and somebody's hair getting pulled. We're better at it now than we used to be, but it's been 10 years. In my own experience now, 2.5 years as the CIO, moving over from rural development, we've done a better job, I think, on the front-end stuff, the planning, the explaining, the buying in, but you do still need to evolve some time for agencies that are budget constrained to get there. So I would say minimum 3 to 5 years to actually implement once you've made the decision that that's where we all want to go.
All right, so I'm hearing, planning and execution, and then operations. I'm hearing about a decade, and I'm hearing, and I didn't ask about franchise funds, Dave, when you answered the question. I don't know if that would change your dissenting vote.
I actually agree that the working capital funds are not a sufficient enough vehicle. We need something like a franchise fund.
Okay. So I'm hearing about a decade total. If you were an agency head and you were looking at all of the back office services, what would the time horizon be? I'm hearing about a decade, and I'm hearing that funding model flexibility is essential. So here's the last question, and I'll open it up for Q&A for a couple of questions. The last question is, what could your community do better to support shared services? And let me go backwards on this one, or reverse order. Sean, what can the CIO community do to better contribute to implementing shared services? I can start with Dave again if you want.
Trying to take my own medicine, spend a little time planning before I go implementing my big now. The CIO community, I think, is probably all bought into the idea of shared services, although I think there's more we could do to bring some governance to what we've already got. For example, some of the GSA contracts, of the networks contract. Right? It's that sense that there is some recourse for me if I'm not getting what I need. I have a place to go. I have a way to bring that up that we really haven't been as dedicated to doing. Shared services, for me, it's a happy day if I can get 17 agencies and 10 staff offices in USDA to share something. We're really just now getting to the point where we're thinking about, gee, I wonder if the Social Security Administration or EPA or somebody else might also be interested in this service and writing our contracts in such a way that we can share.
So intra as opposed to inter.
Right.
You need to be doing both, but there's plenty of challenge on the intra-agency shared service front.
Right.
Good point.
I think there's probably more the council could do in its own meetings to highlight who's got services to share. It's fairly haphazard, chatting after the meeting where you get to buttonhole somebody about what you heard they might be doing and whether we could partner with them.
Okay. And Greg, your community?
I think for the acquisition community, one of the primary things is the complexity of so many of the contracts. So the fewer of those that we have, I think the better.
Fewer types?
The fewer contracts that we have.
Oh, okay.
Procurements that we have to do. So when we're able to consolidate and share many of those, again, one of the things we've asked many of our agencies to do is whenever you put out standards, think not only of yourself, okay, but of some of your sibling agencies. And that's met with limited success, okay. The other challenge, though, it's an opportunity, but it's a challenge as well, is the idea that folks don't have to go to the offices within. Okay, so in addition to having the challenges of shared services intra-department, okay, is the shared services inter-department. And for us, for example, we've done some contracts around HR. Well, many times when our agencies go to other entities, there's no oversight from the department in terms of what they've done. We just know that and they've had the dollars and the authority to do things, and they go outside, it makes it difficult for the acquisition community to know in its entirety what's going on. And so we find that we have, many flowers blooming, okay? Both those that we intended to have and we watch over, but then there's some others out there as well. So it presents a challenge there. I mean, it's shared service for those who are providing that service, okay? But sometimes it means it's a challenge within the department to manage the entire process.
Good point. Kathleen, the CFO?
So from the CFO financial management community, we're taught early on to say no. And there was actually a question I got. I still remember that at OMB when I was being interviewed. So can you say no to things? So I think the CFO community has been warming up to the shared services concept, and it does vary from agency to agency and department to department, but I think that the CFO community is now seeing the real value in shared services, and certainly we're getting that leadership out of OFFM at OMB and at Treasury and out of the FIT office. It makes sense if you really take off your agency hat and you say, okay, from a government-wide standpoint, once we make the investment, the planning, and move to a shared service operation, it really is going to save money. It is. And it's not just in terms of the investment in the IT, it's also in terms of what type of staff do you need. What I experienced at GSA as we moved towards an improved shared services model is we needed more analytical budget and finance staff, and you needed less of them. So I just think that conceptually it's the way to go. It is tough to get there, but I think that we can do it. I think we could reduce the number of contracts. That would be helpful for the contracting community to deal with less. I think you're just going to see the push also with the new budget caps that are upon us. We're going to have to make money in the budget to make these investments, and we're going to have to give up all of the stuff we thought we needed, which frankly in a lot of financial systems isn't what a management wants. that we probably just need to walk away from and just have a clean financial system and transactional base, worrying about the proprietary side, and then worry about what kind of other applications you need to support the decision-making. So many of us, and I'm very fortunate at VHA, I have cost accounting. Many of us have, forever had that on our wish list, cost accounting, and then analytical systems that we can use for decision-making, for the strategic planning, and also for performance metrics. So if you're not looking towards that, I would question sort of what your focus is as a CFO. Worrying about, gee, do I get to get a new financial system is a drag. It really is. If we could just snap our fingers and move to a new one, it would be great. Not that that's going to happen. So I think the CFO community is warming up, and we're trying to move forward.
Good stuff. And Dave, the Chico community?
I see nothing but good news and good things coming up. I'm just the half-full kind of guy, but a couple of things I think that we need. Number one, I think we need better visibility into the actual IT spend for human capital systems. It's been challenging for us trying to understand what it is that we're spending government-wide in HR IT. There's some good things that are happening now. You saw the first phase of benchmarking with the new leadership at OMB, my former boss. You're going to see a lot more than that, and I think it's kind of critical to understand, number one, where you stand in terms of metrics and how do you compare to other agencies, just in terms of information for you that is actionable. Some of the things that are already happening, so I want to put a plug in for GSA right now in the category management. I think that's a step in the right direction in terms of how we purchase HR IT and HR services. And on the selfish side, on my side, is I like to see more support and cohesive cooperation between all of the CXOs. And I want to have the CFO Council, the CIO Council, and all of us kind of working together in terms of how we do investments in technology for back office operations, so that once we know what it is that we're spending, and if we have a better way, we can all join hands and say, you know what, no, we're not going to purchase that new financial management systems because, Treasury has a way to do this, a way that is cheaper, better, faster.
All right, thank you. So we have time to take some questions, and I don't know if we have a microphone. Yeah, they're going to get one. While they're doing that, I just wanted to give my own shout out to my colleague Dave Nader at OMB, who is taking over the lead role, if you will, among the M-side offices. And that's big stuff. Beth Gobert, our Deputy Director for Management, has the 4 or 5 M offices representing the CXO functions, working together. And under the IT reform agenda that came out in 2010, one of the 25 points was to improve shared services, but I should admit that it was very IT-centric, and what we needed was a more management-centric, across all the CXO functions. So I think that these comments are right on target, and the CXOs do need to work more together. And yet there's things in each community that can and should happen, as has been mentioned. But I like the fact at OMB that the torch has been passed from one office to another, and it might not be the end of the passing of the torch, that it might not be bad for each of the CXO functions to lead on shared services for some period of time, because, as you've heard, each community has a role to play, and we need to all work together. So I think if you're that lead sled dog for a while, it opens your perspective to the total spectrum of issues that need to be addressed. Okay, so we'll take a couple of questions. Let's start up here. Chuck Santangelo from DHS, also did serve time at OMB. Loved it.
Kathleen, I I was glad to hear your support for the franchise funds, and also what you said brought up the issue that is often encountered in the age-old struggle between CIOs and CFOs is CFOs tend to fear the loss of transparency as the funds go into another agency. Also, this concern about Anti-Deficiency Act violations and that sort of thing. What one thing could CFOs and CIOs do to bridge the chasm between the two groups?
Around the finances, in terms of exchange, or just in general?
Around overcoming the concern about the transparency.
The transparency on the money and the data. Well, I mean, there's currently, I think it was put in place a couple of years ago, interagency agreements that you can work through. But I think it's upfront, the business requirements and what requirements do the CFOs have to actually see where the money is going and working with the CIOs. I do think overall the CIOs and the CFOs have to work closer together upfront to lay out what their requirements are, what they want to benchmark, what their standards should be. I think it's a group, the CIOs and the CFOs who are just like so heads down most days. It's almost hard to get them together because of what they're responsible for. So that might be I know that OMB has worked on that, bringing CFOs and CIOs together. I think what's interesting about that, so now that I've been at several different layers, at several different agencies, the one thing I think that's interesting is that typically folks are only dealing at the top. The real work is getting done a layer down or two, if you're talking in terms of the administrations or the agencies or the bureaus, in terms of what's really going on and the challenges that both the CFOs and the CIOs are having. So I would encourage everyone to talk at that level as well. So I think just partnering up and laying out what the requirements are up front.
Holmgren from Nara.
Good morning. I think besides the CFO community, I believe the CAO, the acquisition community, also taught more at the beginning, at the early on. Anyway, my question is basically what do you think to acquire IT agilely in the future? What needs to be done at the OMB level as well as the agency level?
And who's the question for? Oh, got it, okay.
Wow, where do I begin? Well, of course, one of the things that happens, particularly when we talk about the whole acquisition community and particularly the policies that are put in place for things to happen, and not just the policies, but then how those end up getting executed. Okay, so for example, okay, in the procurement community, of course, you have OMB, but you also have GSA. Okay, and in terms of the relationship between those two entities, I think is one that sometimes is problematic. Okay, and what I mean by that is that GSA has some authorities that OMB would like for them to not exercise, shall I say, okay? And in doing that, because the individual agencies have to work with both, okay, it presents some challenges, okay? I think about what we're doing right now with property, for example, okay, where we're going to need to have a conversation going forward, particularly as we think about the infrastructure that we have in our buildings and how many of them are decaying, and we need the capital infusion up front to make some things happen. We need to be using every flexibility that we already have, okay, in addition to trying to get some new ones. So I think it's not just OMB, but it's a tripartite community of OMB, GSA, and the individual federal departments that have to get on that same page.
I think if I look in terms of acquisition, again, it's if the statement of work doesn't really say what it's supposed to say, who's at fault? It's generally the program manager. So I know acquisition gets the bad rap, and they really shouldn't, but acquisition should also push back on us and say, what the heck is that? What is it that you're trying to buy here? It makes no sense. And we need to do more of that. It's really more of the upfront. I just think that we just get pushed on the federal side, and it's tough to get the money, and then you get the money and you haven't done all the preparatory work, and then you got to get obligated. So, we really need to spend more time on the planning side and working together, so.
And I think for the community here, Cheryl Cook was just mentioning too, the kinds of contracts that we put in place. We're moving away from time and materials. Okay, I mean, we just are. Okay, and because in terms of sharing the risk, okay, of many of the investments that we're trying to make, it's a challenge as well. So we're seeing more and more, of course, of the fixed price kinds of mechanisms. And some of our most challenging contracts have been those, again, that were done as time and materials, and were not done by our own acquisition folks, okay? So again, the challenge of going to someone who would do it the way, the program person requests, okay? Because they believe that they always know best, when in fact, when it comes to the actual acquisition activity, maybe they don't.
Okay. Do you have a mic in the back already?
I do.
All right.
I do. It's
But does it work? Test.
all right. Good. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Good enough.
No. Okay. So the question relates to working examples, ideas you may have in translating external customer demand into actual performance metrics around services, investment, really anywhere along the life cycle. And starting to see that sort of marketplace pushing, changing the way we compose services.
Stephen, was that a question?
Yeah, we're a little fuzzy on, okay, so you're interested in metrics anywhere in the life cycle of a shared service?
How do citizens drive the composition of services from a specific performance metric?
And which CXO viewpoint would you like?
Well, I'm not going to ask my boss, so...
Good plan.
Go ahead, whoever wants to pick it up.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but in terms of metrics, there's, in our community, in the HR community, we do provider assessments on an annual basis. We actually just completed one where we got thousands and thousands of responses from actual, customers and users in different components of what our shared service providers do in the human capital arena. In there, we ask questions in terms of, are you involved, or, are you satisfied with your involvement in terms of planning for information technology, in terms of the delivery of services for information technology, in terms of strategic planning, and, there's a whole bunch of different components. This is something that we then provide to our shared service centers in order for them to see what their clients think. And they also do their own individual surveys. Is that what you're getting to? Is that your question, or did I miss?
No. If I'm a citizen out there consuming services, and I want a certain level of performance, how does that drive government to invest in certain types of services, or service architecture, or work with existing partners to ensure that those performance criteria are represented in the partnership? It's how does the marketplace drive government development of services, rather than how do we create stuff, throw it out over the beltway, and hope it works?
So actually, I'll take that. Having previously been the one trying to herd cats across OMB and with the agencies for shared services writ large. And I will say that in working with the shared service centers, some of which have been mentioned before, public-facing services are in the minority. but even the intra-government services within and between agencies, benchmarking metrics is still an evolving area. So I think you've brought up a very important area that needs more attention, which is what is that ongoing mechanism for getting citizen involvement and input, especially as shared services do continue to increase within and between agencies, and agencies do their business with the public more and more, through online shared services, that dialogue needs, to improve, most definitely. I was given the 5-minute to-go sign 2 minutes ago, so we have time for one more question.
So if I may, if I can just expand on what you're saying there. One of the things that USDA has done, because I hear you talking specifically about citizens, okay? And so one of the challenges in the 2014 Farm Bill, we actually have a measure that's called a receipt for service, so that anyone that comes into our field offices, it had been a voluntary program before, in which, if they requested one, we would give them one, but now we've moved that from being a voluntary program to a mandatory program whereby if someone comes into one of our service centers and request some kind of service, that they will get a receipt for that service. So that's one thing that has driven us to change our practices. And now, of course, we're trying to figure out what a receipt is, okay? Do you get a receipt for a phone call, for an email, or does it have to be a physical presence in the office, So we are trying to flex to actually be more responsive to the citizens that we serve in making sure that they're provided with a receipt.
So I'll take it from the standpoint of the veterans. So as you all know, we are faced with some challenges at VA. I'm proud to be at VA, by the way. So this week, look for a rollout from the Secretary about where we're going to be taking VA for our veterans and the focus on our veterans. So in terms of service delivery and what's happening in the back office, our challenge is that we have to move to be operationally efficient and effective, because every dollar that's spent on the back office is not being spent on our veterans, and so we're going to turn that around, and we're going to lean in on how we can be more efficient and effective. So I'm not sure what metrics we're going to use, but I like your question, and actually we'll take that back. How are we going to demonstrate to our veterans that we're not spending money needlessly or inappropriately, or we could be more efficient or effective with our appropriated dollars, because our focus should be on health care for our veterans.
Question for OPM. Recently, GSA and OPM had announced this consolidated HR training and support services contract. And prior to that, there were multi-year, contracting solicitation processes whereby which industry has responded, and OPM essentially has canceled that processes and decided to move forward with alliance with GSA. So my question has to do with appropriate communication between the industry and the government and the acquisition planning. Can you comment on the OPM's processes by which that OPM initially had, decided to do its own contracting, and now they canceled it, and then in doing so, they didn't really provide much of a communication to the industry?
Yeah, unfortunately, I am not at liberty to comment on that right now. There's contractual issues associated with that, and I'm sorry, I'm just not at liberty to comment on it.
Well, I was hoping for a short question, but not that short.
It's a gentleman.
I do want to thank the panel members, and now, Chuck, where are we in the program? Thank you so much.